All right, our next factoring technique I call FOIL factoring or undoing foiling. So before I get to it, I just want to remind you how you FOIL if you haven't seen it in a while. We've done it a little bit in some of our past lessons. So the way you FOIL, the letters in FOIL actually stand for what you're multiplying. So the F in FOIL stands for first. So it means that you're multiplying your first terms together. So x times x is x squared. The O in FOIL stands for outer. So your outer pieces, x times 3. The I in FOIL stands for inner, so the innermost pieces, -5 times x. And then the L in FOIL stands for last, so the last term in each parentheses in each binomial, so -5 times 3. And what you'll notice when you FOIL, especially if you FOIL very basic binomials, often your middle terms will combine. So we get 3x minus 5x is -2x minus 15. And the nice thing is a lot of times students will get really good at these and won't have to use a lot of write a lot down. I've had students that have just kind of gone and say, well, I know what these are. I know that I get a -6x on the outside. I know I get a -7x on the inside. So to save themselves time, they'll do the first. They'll combine the outer and inner to get the middle term. And then they'll do the last, -7 times -6 to get 42. So you can do a lot of quick work in your head. If it's written twice, if it's squared, you want to write it twice and then FOIL it. And you could kind of do the same thing. You could go through and do some shortcuts there. That is one that I know you're comfortable with. We also have a special situation when you are multiplying binomials that are identical except for one is positive and one is negative. Your outer and your inner term will actually cancel. You'll have a -5x for your outer term on this one and a 5x for your inner term. Those cancel. So you only have your first term. So if you think about the letters in FOIL, instead of your first, outside, inside, last, you're only going to have your first and your last. Your first is x times x, which is x squared, and your last is 5 times -5, which is -25. So those are some of the multiplying and foiling you've done. So today's lesson is my favorite type of factoring. This video is called FOIL factoring or undoing foiling. Essentially what you're doing is you're taking something that is a trinomial, meaning it has 3 terms. We are only in this video going to focus on ones that have nothing in front of the x squared, so just one x squared. And we're going to figure out how do we unfoil it? How do we FOIL in reverse? The process is that you need to find 2 numbers that multiply to get your C value and add to get your B value. So Delta Math actually has a pretty neat way to practice this process. They call it the X game. I want to just show you. Hopefully you've already tried it, but I want to show you what it looks like. So this is their X game. And they will put a little X and ask you to come up with numbers that multiply to the value on top and add to the value on the bottom. So to multiply to get 9 and add to get 6, the numbers must be 3 and 3 because 3 times 3 is 9 and 3 plus 3 is 6. It's a great way to kind of get your brain ready for this factoring. So our process, and I kind of just already talked about this, your first step with these is you always want to see if there's a GCF I can take out. That's going to be true for any factoring you do. If we can cut those numbers down, make things a little smaller by taking out a GCF, we want to do so. Then you want to find the factors of C that add to B. So what multiplies to get this third value and adds to get this middle value. Sometimes you're going to think of it on the first try. Sometimes you might have to go through several options to get there. Once you have that, you're going to write it as the binomial of these 2 binomials being multiplied together. We call it FOIL factoring or undoing the foiling. Something you should have done a lot in Algebra 1. I like to show students a sign chart. Sometimes it helps them figure out what signs are we working with, positive numbers or negative numbers. So if your C is positive and your B is also positive, you are looking for 2 positive numbers that add to get a positive and multiply to get a positive. If your C is positive, but your middle term is negative, then that means both of your values must be negative because we need to multiply to get a positive, so they need the same sign, and we need to add them and get a negative. If your C is negative, like this one and this one, then that means one of your terms is going to be positive and one of your terms is going to be negative. Especially if you're not as comfortable with your quick facts, this is a nice quick reference to help you figure out what numbers you're looking for. A lot of these need very, very little work because you are kind of going through it in your head. So I'm just going to talk you through what you should be thinking. So with this, we want to find 2 numbers that multiply to get 12 and add to get 8. So to multiply to get 12, add to get 8, my 2 numbers are 6 and 2. So that means one of my factors is x plus 6. One of my factors is x plus 2, and it does not matter which factor you put first. If you type this into Delta Math in the opposite order, you would still be right. If you feel like you don't want me to tell the answers to this, you can always pause these as you see them on your screen, try them on your own, and then press play and listen to me figure it out. So I need two numbers that multiply to get 14, but add to get a negative 9. So I need both numbers to be negative. So that's going to be a negative 7 and a negative 2 because they multiply to get 14 and add to get negative 9. So one of my factors is x minus 7, and one of my factors is x minus 2. Truly, the only challenge with this is if you start working with big numbers. I do want to mention this next example, example 3, because there's an extra step in the beginning. If you have a negative term for your first term, so if you have that negative right here, for that you have to factor out a negative sign or a negative 1. When you factor out a negative, you're left with x squared minus 13x plus 12. What that factoring out a negative does is it will change all of the signs. Now we can do the FOIL factor. So I need two numbers that multiply to get 12 and add to get negative 13. That is going to be a negative 12 and a negative 1. They multiply to get 12 and they add to get negative 13. Next one, I need two numbers that multiply to get a negative 15, but they add to get 2. So in order to multiply to get a negative, one has to be positive, one has to be negative. I want to add to get a positive 2, so that means my numbers must be 5 and negative 3. Again, the order doesn't matter, but the 5 is positive, x plus 5, and the 3 is negative. If you get to the end and you're not sure if you did it right, the quick way to check it, even if you don't write anything down, is just to FOIL it back together. That's what you're doing. You're kind of unfoiling it and seeing what the original factors were. To me, it's just like a game. This one, multiply to get 16 and add to get 8 would be 4 and 4. If you have the same factor, so this one you have x plus 4 and then another x plus 4, you have two options. You can leave your answer like that. I have no problem with that. You can also write your answer with an exponent and just say, since it's there twice, I'm going to write it as x plus 4 being squared. Your choice. The next one has a negative in the beginning, so I'm going to factor out a negative, giving me x squared minus 14x minus 32. And now I need numbers that multiply to get negative 32 and add to get negative 14. Again, if you want to try it on your own, you can pause it right now. You get negative 16 and 2. The negative that you brought out front, just leave it out front. So you have an x minus 16 and an x plus 2. And again, the order does not matter. Here's some more. Again, if you feel comfortable with it, you can keep going. I am going to do one other thing in this video if you want to fast forward a little bit. So I need numbers that multiply to get negative 30 and add to get negative 1. So that's going to be negative 6 and positive 5. So we have x minus 6, x plus 5. This one I need numbers that multiply to get 54 and add to get a negative 15. So that's negative 9 and negative 6. So we have x minus 9 and x minus 6. They have to both be negative to multiply to get a positive, but to add and get a negative. The next one has a negative out front that we need to factor out. So I'm going to do that first. So I get x squared plus 12x plus 32 when I take that negative out. Numbers that multiply to get 32 and add to get 12 are 8 and 4. I still have the negative out front, so I'm going to have an x plus 8 and an x plus 4. Here's the last thing in this video. So if you kind of fast forwarded to here, this is the end. If there is a GCF first, more than just a negative, so we've already dealt with a few that have a negative, you want to take that out first. So for example, in this first one, you can take a 3 out of every term, leaving you with x squared plus 5x plus 6. And then we need numbers that multiply to get 6 and add to get 5. So that would be a 3 and a 2. So you have x plus 3, x plus 2. If you did bring a number to the front, make sure it doesn't disappear. That number does tell us a little bit about what the graph is going to look like with these parabolas, so you don't want it to disappear on you. The next one, we can take out a negative because the first term is negative. We can also take out a 2. So when we divide out a negative 2, we get x squared plus 4x minus 21. I need numbers that multiply to get a negative 21 and add to get 4. That would be a positive 7 and a negative 3. So my factors are x plus 7 and x minus 3. And then finally, the last one, everything is divisible by 5. So I'm going to take the 5 out. So I get x squared minus 11x plus, let's see, 120 divided by 5 is going to be 24. I need two numbers that multiply to get 24 and add to get negative 11. That would be a negative 8 and a negative 3. Keep the 5 out front, and then one of your factors is x minus 8, and one of your factors is x minus 3. And that is how you FOIL factor or undo a foiling.